Mayors, we're going to get started. I know some of you are packing and getting ready to get back home, but I think over the last day and a half, I guess some 36 hours or so, we've really covered a lot and focused on the issue of job creation, the economy, making, I won't say investment because we just heard that's not the right word to use, but making the commitment to improving our highways and our roads and really focusing on putting people back to work. You all had an opportunity to come to visit a park, Costello Park on the east side where I grew up. It's a community of great people, a community that historically for decades has been a community victimized by gun and gang violence, one of the higher areas of crime in the city. And I'm very proud that over the last 9 years, Chief?
Yes, sir.
9 years now, crime is down dramatically in Los Angeles. And even prouder to say that in the last 6, while I've been mayor, it's declined even more dramatically, about a 40% drop in homicides, 36 or 7% drop in violent crime. Gang crime is down significantly, and so that you understand in the city, about 52% of the homicides are committed by gangs or gang members. So early on, as we were discussing and debating the issue of what we do to address gun and gang violence, there had previously been an effort on the part of our community development department to kind of spread the money like peanut butter across all 15 councilmanic districts. There was an audit done, a group of outside experts, one of whom is here, Connie Rice, who said that is not the way to be focusing on gun and gang crime. We need to focus on the hot spots, on the areas that have the highest level of violence. We need to have an innovative and comprehensive, I know that's not a word we want to use anymore, but yeah, we're running out of words. You didn't get to hear the last speaker, but he was quite effective in describing words that work and words that don't. But an approach that is multi-pronged. And so our efforts now around gang and gun violence and youth development are now centered in the mayor's office, no longer in CDD. We no longer focus across all 15 councilmanic districts. We focus in the primary focus anyway is in the areas of the highest violence. And the moderator for today's discussion will be Guillermo Cespedes. He's the Director of Gang Reduction and Youth Development. He has over 25 years experience in the design, implementation, and supervision of services to disadvantaged and at-risk youth. He is the architect of the Summer Night Lights program we saw on Thursday, but that is just one small part of a broader, multi-pronged program to deal with this issue. And with us as well as my partner, we're very fortunate in many towns, though not all of them, but in a lot of them, there's always a friction between the police chief and the mayor. We don't have that friction in this town, and I'm very lucky. I talk about Cheif Beck when I say that, in many departments, politics is the same way. It's not just the police department, but most of the people that end up being chief, were the attaché to the chief when they were the president of their class, their graduation class in the academy, and then they were the attaché to the chief, and their whole life was built around one day being chief. And I've always said that what I loved about Charlie, our chief, is that he was a community-based police officer. He actually is the first police chief to have been a senior lead officer, which is our community-based police officers. And he had boots on the ground for years before he actually started really kind of skyrocketing up through the department ranks. And he manages 10,000 sworn officers, 3,000 civilian employees. They have an annual budget of $1 billion. He's really been the chief architect of evolving the culture in our department. Our department is probably now the most diverse city department in LA. About 70%, almost about 70% of the department comes from, traces their origins to Latin America, Asia, or Africa. We have, he's been a real big supporter of our anti-gang efforts, and we'll be able to hear from him in a moment. Second panelist is Connie Rice. Connie likes to say that she sued every city administration since she first became a lawyer. And I know that at any moment she could sue me as well. And she always reminds me of that. She's renowned for her approach to tackling problems of inequity and exclusion. She's teamed up with conservatives on education issues and on the LA police and with the LA Police Department to support the Watts gang truce. She successfully litigated class action civil rights cases, winning more than $1.6 billion in policy changes and remedies during her 9 years in the Los Angeles office of the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. Our next panelist is Thomas App, Chief of Staff to the Assistant Attorney General for Justice Programs. And in that position, he works on a broad spectrum of criminal and juvenile justice issues, plays a lead role in coordinating the administration's National Forum on Youth Violence Prevention. In addition, he represents the department on several interagency committees, including the White House Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative. And finally, our last panelist is Skip Townsend, a highly respected community violence intervention worker. He's the executive director of Second Call Community Intervention Agencies, called upon by law enforcement and my office to interrupt violence in multiple neighborhoods, whether or not that violence is gang-related. And so now I'd like to ask Guillermo to kind of lead the discussion and help us hear from folks who've really been a part of some of the most innovative work around gun and gang violence anywhere in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all of you for visiting. This is really truly an honor to share some of the work that we do, and hope that that is of help to you in the mission in your respective cities. In particular, I want to thank all of you for coming out to visit Summer Night Lights. I did have a chance to speak to many of you on the ground, and saw all of you talking to youth, asking questions, and really listening to these communities. That is hugely important, because Summer Night Lights is really a quilt of, right now, 32 neighborhoods that keep spreading throughout the city. I was at the closing of one of the Summer Night Lights parks last night, and completely in a different geographic area of the city. And the youth, the fact that mayors from throughout the country came to Summer Night Lights really energized the youth, because it tells them that their neighborhood matters, that their lives matter. So your visit was good medicine, so thank you for coming. This discussion is going to be a conversation. We're doing phenomenal work in Los Angeles, and yet we're humbled because we do need to do more. And we're very proud of the work that we're doing. And we want to share that work with you and hope that it helps you develop what you're doing. And we also want to hear from you, because what we have found out is that we learn, this is a process of constant learning. I've been in the field, as the mayor said, way longer than I want to remember, but I still consider myself a student of this work. I think if you work with human problems, at some point you come to realize that you have to stay humble. The site that you visited last night, we consider it a hot zone. Summer Night Lights is one programmatic strategy out of the mayor's office, out of 16 different programmatic strategies, comprising or being categorized into 6 different prongs: primary prevention, secondary prevention, intervention case management, intervention, crisis response, community engagement strategies, and of course, suppression, which we do not do, but we support law enforcement in that. Comprehensive strategies, our office is on the 22nd floor of City Hall. We just recently moved there. But you cannot make policy, you cannot develop programmatic approaches from the 22nd floor. So we like to think of the work that we do as building policy and practice both from top down and from bottom up. So we're going to go through the panel and do a few things. First, frame the problem. Second, talk about what we do and why we do it, the nuts and bolts of that. Third, talk a little bit about where we need to go next. And then lastly, how do we keep this conversation going? So to frame the problem, we like to look at it both from a city perspective, a national perspective, and a specific neighborhood perspective from people that are on the ground day in and day out. So I'd like to turn it over to Cheif Beck, and he will start to frame why we're here. Why are we having this conversation? What is the problem?
Thank you, Jer Moen, and welcome to Los Angeles. This is a city that we're very proud of, and we're extremely proud of what we're doing in the reduction of gang violence. And like Guillermo, I remind people that we should be humble about that. We should be good at this. We've been doing it longer than anybody else. This is any of you that have street gangs probably owe them, or many of them, to the city of Los Angeles. If you have Crips, if you have Bloods, if you have 18th Street, if you have MS, this is where they sprang to life. The mayor's right. I have been doing this job for a long time. I've been a cop in LA for 35 years. And before I was a senior lead officer, as the mayor talked about, I was a gang officer. I worked as a uniformed gang officer. I worked as a gang detective. I was a gang sergeant. I ran gang units as a lieutenant, and I was the geographic area captain, which is kind of the person that runs segments of the city in 2 of the most gang active divisions of the city. So I've had a lot of experience doing this a lot of different ways. And I think that's a perspective I want to bring. Back when I was a young police officer, we relied entirely on the suppression model. The more gang cops, the better. The more arrests, the better. And we fought that battle, and that's what we called it. It was a war on gangs, and that's exactly what the mayor at that time and the chief of police at that time termed it. We fought that battle for years. And in fact, by doing that, we managed to increase gang violence. Even though we made a lot of arrests and we did a lot of the activities that I talked about, the problem went the wrong way. To give you some kind of perspective, in 1912, let's just use 20 years ago, 92, 93, we had almost 1,100 murders in the city of Los Angeles. Over half of them, as the mayor said, were gang-related, about 600. So 600 gang-related murders 20 years ago. About 10 years ago, at the beginning of this century, 2002, we had over 300 gang murders. Right before the mayor took office, we had over 200. Last year, we had the lowest homicide rate that this city has seen since the 60s. We had less than 300 total homicides, 297 to be exact, and 150 of those were gang-related. And I use homicide because it's an easy number to get your head around, but we measure 12 categories of gang crime, all the Part 1 categories, and then we've added some others, extortion and kidnapping, some other things. And every one of those categories is down over the last 4 years. All of them in double digits, most of them have been halved. And what's different? The difference is that we've embraced a wraparound strategy. And it's 360, right? That's what I'm supposed to use? 360-degree strategy. I cut the last
Not comprehensive anymore.
Not comprehensive. So we've addressed a strategy that looks at not only addressing the symptoms of the problem, and gang violence is a symptom of this problem. You know, the problem has to be addressed at the root level, you know, keeping kids out of gangs, which we call prevention and the multi-prongs of prevention. It has to be addressed at the operational level, operational gang level. People are already in gangs. You have to have case management to help people get out of gangs. You have to have violence interruption. We call it intervention, and Skip's going to talk about that a lot, to affect violence, to impact violence. You got to have a suppression component that's traditionally the police that understand the values of the other components and work with them. And when we talk about the fact that Skip and the folks that work intervention get notified of gang crime by me on the BlackBerry, just like all my captains do, I think you begin to understand the closeness of the relationship. And then, finally, you have to have a reentry strategy, because like I tell people all the time, there's a fantastic reentry strategy in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, it's run by street gangs. So, you know, we have to ensure that there are other options for people, because locking people up is a temporary thing. And if you don't have a solution when they come out, then all you do is add to the problem. So that's the scope of the problem in Los Angeles. That kind of frames the problem. I think that for you, the message I would have to mayors is that maybe the hardest piece of this is getting buy-in across the table. You know, my mayor is beyond supportive of this, and that's what drives the buy-in. But having Guillermo and me and Connie and Skip, people that have extremely diverse backgrounds in this problem, all coming together and agreeing on the solution, that's been the key. The key is that all these pieces of this big machine are finally pulling in the same direction instead of fighting against each other. And that's what's made the difference.
Thank you, Chief. I was commenting to the mayor that your language is very close to the language of a social worker. It's very, very interesting as a chief of police. That I also want to make a comment about some of the things that we've done regarding with the chief. That, in fact, when we were looking to pass an item through City Council and we were having difficulties getting the Intervention Training Academy approved, it was the Chief of Police who came to Council and made a very strong statement stating that gang intervention training must be funded and must be developed as a full-fledged comprehensive training platform. Connie, you and I spend lots of times having conversations about this. What's your view of the problem?
Thank you, Guillermo, and thank you all for being here. When we made our pivot point in the year 2006, 2007. It was as a team. We all together wrote a report at the behest of the Ad Hoc Committee on Gang Violence and Youth Development. That report had 47 experts, many of whom came from your cities. We had Gary Slutkin from Chicago. We visited Boston's 10-point program. We went to Baltimore. We were in Alameda County up north in California. We went to many of your cities and saw what you were doing and came back and then looked at LA and the scale of what we have here. So much of what we've done is built on elements that have come from around this country. And so I just want to reiterate, it is with humility and with gratitude, and again, the apology for disseminating our gangs across the country, that we are engaging with you today. I just want to say maybe 3 things, and to reiterate what the chief and the mayor have said. The extraordinary glue that keeps this machine together and clicking comes from the fact that you've got former adversaries and frenemies finally taking a look at one another and realizing that after a 25-year war on gangs that cost $25 billion, we had 6 times as many gangs, twice as many gang members conservatively estimated, and we had done nothing to stop the spread of gang culture. And so I had to stop suing, LAPD had to stop fighting us, the politicians had to stop acting like it was just the police department's job. Gang intervention had to stop acting like, you know, they were alone and by themselves in islands and operating on their own. And when we came together to put the report together that said, here's how we're going to fix this problem together, we took an epidemiological model. And I'm sure Frank Luntz would tell me, never use that word. So what it said was, the military says they do holistic. Frank Luntz says 360. Some of you may say everybody getting in the boat and rowing. All hands on deck is what the Navy talks about it. But the bottom line is you have to have a multi-sectored, cross-disciplinary. You've got to have county and city working together. And none of this allows anybody to stand up and take all the credit. So one of the biggest elements is trust. And when the mayor and the police chief stood in front of 12 cameras in the mayor's press room and said, we are going to ask the Advancement Project and several other groups to run a gang intervention training academy that will have people teaching in the police academy, the sheriff's academy, and the mayor looked at the cameras and said, and each one of you is waiting for one of these guys to trip up and you want to use it against me. And guess what? I'm not running from this because my police chief, Cheif Beck, is telling us that we have to have the help of gang intervention, we have to have the help of the schools, we have to have the help of parents who know where their kids are, we have to do a cultural transformation, another word we're not supposed to use, we have to do a strategic suppression transformation, and we have to have training. All of that took enormous trust. It also took enormous political courage from the mayor, from the police chief, whose officers are looking at him like he's lost his mind. You're going to work with former gangsters and do what? And the mayor basically looking at the press, and the press are just waiting for one gang intervention worker to mess up and then label him something that will prevent him from getting reelected. So the political courage is enormous from the police chief and from the mayor. And if you don't have that, and you don't have a police chief who gets it, that it can't just be suppression, and that you have to work with people who used to sue you, it's not going to work. It's not going to work at this level. I know. We all laugh about it still, don't we? You see Guillermo laughing. You see the mayor laughing. But it's very, very true. The training takes an enormous investment. There were foundations that put up $500,000 to take gang intervention workers and turn them into professors. You want to see alchemy? Watch that process. And then watch them teach before a police academy. If you've ever seen gang officers taking notes from Skip Townsend, a gang intervention expert, and Gerald Cavett, and Mike Garcia, all gang intervention, and with Gary Slutkins, it would be their violence interrupters, and with other agents, you know who these guys were and who they've become. They become leaders in violence reduction, and they help keep kids safe. But they do it in partnership with LAPD and the Sheriff's Department, although they're a little further behind. But those partnerships, remember he said the word partnership was okay to use? Those partnerships have been critical. The training is critical, and we have to take it to another level. Guillermo has come up with a fantastic prevention model that we're going to have to get training developed for. And it's not just going to be doctors and PhDs and public health officials who teach it. You're going to have gang intervention workers also teaching it. You're going to have teachers. You're going to have nurses. So this really is a galvanize all hands and really force cross-departmental, cross-jurisdictional, cross-disciplinary cooperation. We're not there yet. I don't see a single city in the country, including LA, that has achieved the real comprehensive, holistic, all-hands-on-deck, sophisticated level that's necessary to stop the spread of the ideology and the culture. And I'm going to end on this note, Guillermo. There is a difference between crime reduction, which is critical, and culture reduction, and the stopping of the spread of the ideology. You have to have a reduction of the thinking and the culture that produces the gang mindset. And you also have to have a culture of hope. And you have to be able to offer folks an exit ramp out of the gang life and out of the prison revolving door. That requires another word that we're not supposed to use, which is investment in human capital. If the jobs aren't there, if the schools aren't clicking, if the summer programs aren't there, all we're doing is shoveling quicksand. And so I look forward to hearing how your programs have advanced, but there is a phenomenal job being done here. I'll leave you with this statistic. Last year, Summer Night Lights, you may have heard this last night, and I'm sorry if you did, it's a repeat, but I find this statistic absolutely startling. It is at the crime reduction level, but when you reach this level of crime reduction, it is transformative. It is game-changing. Only in and around the Summer Night Lights parks, which are gang hot zones, did we see a 57% drop in gang homicides. That is transformative. They don't want to hear from me, the cops don't want to hear from me, but when they hear that that kind of statistic and crime reduction can be reached with this all hands on deck strategy, guess what? Gang officers who used to walk out of the room when I walked in are now signing on to what Cheif Beck is and the mayor are pushing. So I would leave you with that thought, and I look forward to bolstering what we're doing with what you're doing, and I thank you for being here and for having the opportunity to address you.
Thank you, Connie. Thomas, from your work at a national level, how would you frame both the problem and the comprehensive strategy approaches that have now become common among many cities? Obviously, cities are at different stages of implementation of a comprehensive strategy. But I believe everyone in the room is pretty much in agreement that this requires additional responses besides law enforcement. And we believe that is happening across the country. However, we're at different levels of implementation, because once you start implementing, that's a whole different set of variables that you're dealing with. So Thomas, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, Guillermo. And I'm a little bit challenged today because I'm in such strong agreement with Connie and Cheif Beck, and I'm sure with Skip in their approach. And it really, first of all, I'd like to say, that the Attorney General and the Eric Holder and the Assistant Attorney General, Lori Robinson, my boss, send their regards, and they are firmly supportive of this approach. And you can see it through the administration's supportive initiatives like the Neighborhood Revitalization Initiative, the National Forum on Youth Violence, the U.S. attorneys throughout the country, including Los Angeles' U.S. attorney, their anti-violence strategy, which explicitly emphasizes prevention and reentry, through the department's initiatives like Defending Childhood, and obviously our work with gangs. This is an approach that is that you see increasingly around the country, and it's something that's enthusiastically supported by this administration and the Department of Justice. It's kind of hard to know where to begin because Connie and the Chief have said so much that I would say. I'm going to very quickly just sort of frame this the way we do when we're going into new cities and talking about this. I think that it's very clear that the comprehensive approach, and I know we can find another word later, to this issue is not easy, but it is effective. And that's what the research shows, that's what the evidence shows, and that's what the numbers shows, as you've heard. And so then the question is, how do you push that out? And I also, just a word on terminology, I'd advise not getting hung up on the terms gangs versus youth. Everything that we're going to be talking about today is going to be applicable to your city's youth violence issues, whether you have small crews, whether you have highly organized gangs, whether you have neighborhood rivalries, you're going to be able to apply these things. So if you're looking and saying, well, I don't have a gang problem like LA, you can still use these strategies. First, the importance of multidisciplinary partnerships, law enforcement, but also education, faith and community-based, businesses, philanthropy, service providers, all at the table. You heard that from the Chief and Connie. Second, balanced approaches. Again, you have to have a robust enforcement component, but you have to also have a strong prevention component, a strong intervention component, and a strong reentry component. And a lot of cities have that, but are those approaches talking to one another? Are they actually coordinating? That's something that we're trying to encourage at the federal level. And you see that, I'm not sure if Mayor Ryback is still here, but their blueprint strategy is one that does that very well. Data-driven strategies. One of the things that you will find in doing this, and you've heard this early, is a lot of the hard work in implementing these approaches is political, is moving resources from areas that have a lot of political support but haven't been effective to more effective areas. And there, the only way to get past that politics is to rely on the data and the evidence. Memphis is doing an extraordinary job there and being very, very data-driven. LA with their predictive policing. Boston, highly analytical with their BRIC Center. And countless examples that many of you are doing here. So those three things, multidisciplinary partnerships, balanced approaches, data-driven strategies. Now, one thing I want to sort of talk to you about that is how does this actually work in practice if you're just beginning or you're part of the way there but not all the way there. And I just want to share with you some lessons from the federal experiences in moving from city to city. I think first, as you've heard, it begins at the top. You have to have strong, consistent, sustained leadership from you, the mayors. If you're not behind it strongly, it won't work. Because the key to the comprehensive approach is all these different people working together. Only you can encourage that. Then, and I can't emphasize this enough, the importance of strong police leadership, like Chief Beck. You have to have a police chief who endorses prevention and intervention. If you have a sort of backward-looking chief who is focused on busting heads, making arrests, trying to arrest the way out of the problem, it will be very difficult to get this approach off the ground. A third thing I'd say is you have to create a positive, inclusive vision. This isn't just about fear. This is also about hope. And that vision has to include everyone. And so in terms of your outcomes, you need to be talking about reducing violence and getting gangs off the street, but you also have to be talking and focusing on positive outcomes for kids. So that means truancy rates, that means graduation rates, that means youth employment, things like that. Then in terms of your process, the process that we see that works most effectively is you assess, you plan, you implement, and you reassess. You can't jump into action without actually carefully studying the problem. And each of your cities is going to be different. I think that I am extremely impressed by LA's approach. But LA's approach is not going to work perfectly for each of you because you're not LA. You're not as decentralized. You're not as large. You don't have quite the same problem. And so you have to fine-tune these things, and you have to look into it. Then you have to plan. This coordination doesn't happen by accident. You have to plan for it. And that needs to be a robust process that is not just about words on a page, but actually getting that political consensus that that the chief and Connie talked about earlier. Then implementation, and you have to be very, very, you have to hold people accountable in terms of implementation, because a lot of this coordination, often people sort of think of it as something they do after their 9 to 5. And you have to emphasize that this is a core mission. And then you have to reassess. No one's plan is perfect. San Jose has an extraordinary plan, and they are very multidisciplinary. They've been at it for 20 years, and they're still constantly fine-tuning. LA is the same. Many of your cities are the same. There's no shame in that, but you need to be constantly reassessing and changing what you're doing. So then, just a couple more concrete things that you need to do. You need to build infrastructure to get this done. And there's many paths up the mountain. I think LA has taken an extraordinary step with Guillermo's office. In Memphis, they have the Memphis Shelby Crime Commission. In other cities, they have some other strong institution where this is their job. And then the last thing I would say is the importance, and I think you all know this in a variety of issues, is the importance of that glue person. And I think in this case in LA, it's Guillermo. And the importance of having a strong person day to day who drives this forward. That person has to be able to bring lots of different people to the table. One mistake is that people make it someone who's too junior and they're sort of underpowered. They can't get the people to the table. And that person has that support and has that skill. And there's not that many people who can do that. So I hope that this gives you some concrete ideas, not just from LA, but how other cities have done this effectively. And I would just say that the Department of Justice is there to support you. We heard in a previous conversation about the concierge. I can be your concierge on this. We have lots of resources from the National Gang Center. The National Forum on Youth Violence is just really trying to start this national conversation. It's 6 cities now: Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Memphis, Salinas, and San Jose. But we will be expanding, and we're happy to talk to you about those approaches and introduce you. And that's the other thing is that don't struggle with this in isolation. You're not alone. All of you are part of a national community on this, and talk to one another. What worked for you? What worked for you? Part of the thing we do in the forum is we do this thing that's, a very fancy term called peer-to-peer learning. All it is travel money. We take people in one city, we say, there's a great program in this other city. Go fly and see how they did it in practice. Talk to one another. So we'd be happy to support you as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Before we go to Skip, I want to change the frame a little bit and talk about what we do in particular areas. We've had some discussion about how to think about it. So I want to pick a topic that is, for most of us, a crisis moment, which is there's a violent incident, maybe a homicide in your particular city, and how do we respond to that? We have established a protocol in Los Angeles over the last 2.5 years where every incident of gang-related, any incidents of violence, it may be gang-related or not, requires 3 entities to respond simultaneously. Law enforcement, of course, either me or one of my staff members, and a gang intervention worker. The vehicle for that response, or the communication vehicle for that response, is of course a racer notification from law enforcement to a BlackBerry phone, which is carried by all intervention workers that are contracted through agencies that work with our office. So there is an incident of violence, and there is an actual written protocol that we all have within 15 minutes of the racer notification to respond. Now, respond means you may end up going to the emergency room, You may end up going to a crime scene. You may need to meet with the family. There have been cases where it appeared important that a mother who had lost a child speak directly with the mayor, and he has done so. There has been situations where it's important for the mayor to come out the next day and meet with a community group. All of that mobilization is part of that immediate response. So I want to go to Skip on this because most of the time that I see Skip is really actually at crime scenes. It is at a time when there's a crisis in a particular neighborhood, at a time where we're trying to prevent retaliatory shootings as a result of that. So Skip, can you talk a little bit about what you do, where you do it, how you do it, who you talk to? What's that process like for you?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Guillermo, and the mayor for having me. Honored and humbled to be in here. Actually, that question, my answer can actually answer the other question too, what is the problem? And the problem is primarily the disconnect of the community. So creating that collaboration kind of solves that problem. When you have a community that feels disconnected from law enforcement, disconnected from the 22nd floor, as you put it, and the things that go on, having someone with the license to operate, and we don't use that term lightly, the individual who responds to any of those crime scenes have to have the license in that area. I actually heard that you guys were going to the park for Summer Night Lights. I don't have the license at the park you went to. That's why I didn't show up. That is not my area. So as I get the racer, even though it might not be my primary area, also what I want to do if I'm a good interventionist is I want to contact a person who works in that area and make sure that he's aware, because the safety of my community is based on the relationship with the surrounding communities. So we have to be in constant contact with all the different interventionists. We also have to be in constant contact with law enforcement. And one of the beauties of working with LAPD is at this point, I'm very fortunate they get it. So we have the lieutenants and the captains who understand the importance of intervention, and they're able to call us and help us with information that'll be helpful to us. Let me say that one more time. They let us know the information that is helpful to us. As an interventionist, I do not go out and do an investigation or give them information that will be helpful to them, because if I do, that will be the last time I'd be able to have that license to operate that I spoke of. So it's very important that what we do is rumor control. When we go to a scene, we respond the same way law enforcement will respond. We want to be in the crowd as well. We want to get as much information as possible. But the information that I want to get is not going to lead me to a suspect. The information that I want to get is going to help me identify the family, those who are going to be emotionally torn because of this incident. So like Guillermo said, it might take me to actually go to the hospital to see who's at the hospital, to see who the mother is, or the father, the uncles, the brothers. So the information that I want to get, number one, is to do rumor control and to stop the retaliation. For example, here in Los Angeles, we lost a couple of our trauma centers. So now if there's a shooting, I'll just give you guys an example of, say, Adams and Western, and not more than a mile away is Jefferson and Western. Well, law enforcement knows, and so will the fire department, that both victims will be transported to California Hospital. As an interventionist, I have to know that as well, because if these communities just start going back and forth with each other, now we're going to have a problem when the families are emotional at the hospital. So what we want to do is we want to eliminate the usual suspect. The first thing I want to do is get into a crowd, and I want to feel the tension. I want to feel the emotion of the crowd, and I want to diffuse any rumors that are going around. And by doing that, I have to have the license from that community. They spoke about the 15 different council districts here. I myself don't have the relationship in all 15. So what I want to do is get whatever information I can and call the interventionist that's working that council district, working in that area where that situation is. What we basically want to do is just stop the stacking of bodies. If we can stop it with this one shooting, one incident, whatever it is, we like to do that. And primarily we have to jump ahead of the curve as well. We have to be proactive. So in order to be effective in the community, we have to be working with the young people, doing safe passage, coming home from school. We have to also work with the prevention programs and find out what are some of the problems that are going on. As some of the young people in the schools or even in the parks, Summer Night Lights, I also work Summer Night Lights, we have to find out what's the ongoing conflict so that we'll be able to stop it before it leads to something nasty or something, incident that we won't be able to recover from. So that's, hopefully that answers that.
Let me start off by saying a perfect example of believing in something strong enough, I won't call it political courage, but believing in something strong enough that you'll defend it was you actually got to see 2 days ago. The night before our visit, there was a shooting outside of the park. It wasn't in the park. It was as people were leaving the park at 12 midnight or a little after midnight. If you remember, the first thing from anything you read or any of the media coverage was Mayor touts Summer Night Lights as an effective anti-gang program, bringing 50 mayors to visit, and, you know, essentially egg on his face. There was a act of violence, and you know, our response was, well, that's why we have this program. These are the areas of the highest crime rate. We've had issues in the past where an intervention worker maybe gets arrested for something, selling drugs or whatever. And the chief has defended our programs by saying sometimes even police officers get arrested, politicians get arrested, you know, people get arrested in this world. We haven't backed away from it's probably a bad word too, a panoply of programs, the 360, that's the worst, that's even worse than comprehensive. Yeah, a 360-degree approach. And that's why it's working. And, you know, so, you know, I can tell you, it's not always popular with my colleagues in the council, who I have a great deal of respect for. They all want one of these programs. And what we said is, by the way, let me mention, philanthropy is very, very important. I don't know if Eileen's still here, but she wrote a long note. This program has been so successful that philanthropy is joined in. And it's literally now funded half by philanthropy. And it's funded by them in no small part because it is as effective as Connie mentioned. But we've not bowed to the political pressure of, I want one of these parks in my neighborhood, because we don't have the resources for that. We're focusing our resources where the problem is the greatest. And we actually have done that now around street repair, around a broad range of issues that never used to be done. Before, it was always done 1 by 15. Around the allocation of police officers, around a number of just even changes at the fire department were made recently based on, hey, everybody doesn't get the exact same resource. Some communities have a lot more emergency services. So that's been a key for us. The multi-pronged approach, the broad support for these programs, the fact that we're all talking to one another, and we're evaluating it. I mean, you know, I'll tell you, while I did defend the program the other day and said that, you know, this is why we have this program, believe me, we were concerned about having a shooting at that park, and we're constantly recalibrating what we're doing. We know we're not the only one, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, who are doing effective things around these issues. So we're very mindful of, we got to keep on improving. But any questions? Yes, Mayor James?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess from my standpoint, all of this looks and feels like the right thing to do. But from my standpoint, particularly being in office now for a whopping 83 days, my question is, where is the entry point? Where do you start? What's the first thing that you have to do? How do you lay the foundation? What do you need in the infrastructure? How much lead time? Budgets, all of those nuts and bolts things that I would want to know if I want to start that comprehensive, another bad word, if I want to start that big discussion in Kansas City that I want to have on this issue. What's the first thing I need to do?
Any of this?
Well, I think we'll all share some information on that. From my perspective, I do believe that a plan, it's important. But equally as important, I believe that there is some work that's being done in Kansas City that needs to be incorporated into that plan. I look at this problem as building from the inside out. You do develop a plan, but you do have to really bring in what you already have and build from there. And then the same things that have been mentioned. It should be data-driven. You should have some way of evaluating it. And of course, it's got to be tied into law enforcement.
You know, the only thing that I would add is and Guillermo hates this term, but I would pick a gang czar. Pick whoever your lead person's going to be that coordinates your programs and identify that person, or at least start to identify that person. And then get that person and your chief and start the discussion between them about, you know, what kind of programs you want to implement. And then, you know, if that goes well and you're happy with if you think they're ready to learn or they need to learn on this, and I don't know, then think about maybe sending them out a little bit. You know, look at Boston, look at Chicago, maybe come to LA, that kind of thing. Just set some context up so they have some mentorship and people that, you know, and I never claim to have all the answers, but I have made almost all the mistakes now. So, you know, maybe I could help somebody avoid a couple of those.
Mayor Soglin?
Yeah, first, just in response to the mayor's question, one thing is you've personally got to do it. You've got to be in the room, and you've got to make sure they know this is not the mayor's toy, this is for real, and convey that message through the organization. But the question I've got for our panel and for you, Mayor, is certain resources statutorily are in the hands of the county or in the hands of the state. And they aren't always ready to come onto the same page and be, I mean, it's hard enough to take all the team from within the city and the nonprofits and the private sector. What do you do with those independent other governmental agencies without throwing down a gauntlet and bashing heads?
Connie?
Notice he looks at me for that. I think that that's the stage that we're at. We started with the city, and I would just add, not only is the mayor critical, but if you don't have your police chief, this isn't going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And so the progressive police chief is critical. But the cross-jurisdictional stuff is the hardest part of this. Getting the schools to the table, and in LA, the county is the $24 billion gorilla. And they've got probation, they've got the child services, they've got the safety net. The county has the safety net. And so we have, it's like pulling teeth, and we are just in the beginning stages of it, but creating those tables within the county first, because those departments don't talk to each other. And so that is a viper's nest of bureaucratic taming that is our current nightmare. And I promised Guillermo I wouldn't be colorful, but I'm sorry, Guillermo. It's too late. So I think you've touched one of the third rails in this business. And at the state level, for example, Attorney General Kamala Harris gets it, and we're trying to get how many waivers do we need, how many funding categories can we get waived, and this is why some legal talent at the table is useful. Getting the prosecutors to stand down is almost as critical as having the police chief. But you need a team of people that are good at getting task force cooperation going. It can get done if you get county council to sit down with the county CEO and the top supervisors, deputies, so the people who actually make that level of government work. If you can get them around a table and talking to one another to say, okay, we've got to get these obstacles out of the way. They won't let this category of money be spent on this, and we need waivers for here, 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 and here. That's the kind of stuff you're gonna, it's like any emergency planning task force, that fusion center that most of your cities have, it's that model. And you may even want to plug this process through your fusion center, your emergency, your FEMA emergency planning, where the fire department talks to the police department for the first time and the paramedics actually talk to the cops. That whole system that you have for emergencies, if you have a gang epidemic, it's a similar emergency. And then it becomes a way of doing business. We have not achieved that here in LA County. I'm not going to pretend we have. We're just starting that process.
Yes, sir.
I've got a question for Skip. I'm intrigued by what you do, the intervention piece. Seems like it takes highly specialized skill or experience training to deal with it in an effective way. We, of course, do intervention in St. Louis. I'm Francis Slay, Mayor of the City of St. Louis. But I'm concerned about the effectiveness of it. Where do we find people like you? How are they developed? Where do we get individuals who can undertake the intervention piece in an effective way? Not just go through the motions and go out there and talk to some people, but how do we get, where do we find intervention individuals, specialists like you, who can get the job done and make a difference?
Okay, so thank you for your perception of me. Guillermo made me wear a shirt and tie today. Normally I'd have on khakis and a t-shirt. So trust me, they are out there. As Connie brought up a number of names, Gerald Cavett, Mike Garcia, these are the guys who once tore down your cities. I myself apologize. Let me first apologize for being a misguided, misdirected youth. They're all out there. And I myself, I'm a tow truck driver. But there was a guy named Bo Taylor who had the vision, the dream of bringing this together before there was even a term intervention. So it's individuals who want their own atonement. They're not doing it for funding. They're not trying to create community-based organizations. You'll find most of them are volunteer, as I myself have done a lot. So you'll find the volunteers that are working in the faith-based and community-based organizations that come from these communities. They won't be the executive directors. They won't be the treasurers on the board of something. They'll be the guys grassroots. You've got to find them grassroots. That is where they get the license to operate. And there was also something brought up about, I think the mayor said that there's been an interventionist that's been arrested for this and one arrested for that. You have to weed through them. And please don't get discouraged. But one other thing that happens now is we're forced into training. Before, it was all about the emotional feel from the community. How do I feel about my community? And then at some point, guys would go home and drink and smoke weed. Well, once we started getting training, that is the level of professionalism that we have to build up to. There has to be the training, has to be in process, and it has to be consistent. Just because the individual says, well, I've been doing this for 10 or 15 years and want to be grandfathered in, no, it has to be levels of training that they have to keep aspiring to as well.
Okay, a couple follow-ups quickly.
And just
Is
one
there-
second
all right.
on that. And one of the, when you talk about collaboration, the police chief has attended those graduations. I mean, just unheard of. I mean, the kind of collaboration. And so have I. That never would have happened in another era and with another chief.
Okay, who does the training, and who, what the organization you work with, the agency, Is that a city government agency?
Well,
Or
it's a
is-
collaboration between, and Connie can speak a little bit more about the curriculum and all of that, but it's a collaboration between the city and the Advancement Project and an entity called the Urban Peace Academy that developed a curriculum specifically designed for intervention workers. This curriculum was developed by intervention workers over a period of time. Skip has worked with them, and Connie's shop oversees the academy.
And we were asked by LAPD. We were asked by Cheif Beck to help shepherd through this training platform. There had to be a professionalization. What officers said was, we're willing to give intervention a chance if they become professional, if we can trust in their integrity and we know there's some standards and there's someone overseeing their performance. So the mayor and Guillermo created, and it's a brilliant title by Guillermo, the La Vida Training Academy, and it's the first time the city has actually directly sponsored its own gang intervention training academy. Now, it is practitioner-driven. There's a standards committee of the top gang intervention leaders. Skip is one of them. Gerald Cavett, Mike Garcia, David there's a number of the very, very, very top who are recognized by law enforcement, recognized by civic agencies like mine as the top practitioners. They developed the curriculum. They took the time and effort to learn how to teach, which was a fascinating process. I wish we'd been able to film. That took $500,000 from the Weingart Foundation and the California Endowment to give the training, to turn them into instructors because they have the expertise. But at this academy, we have gang injunction prosecutors who teach. We have law enforcement officials. The chief has taught there. His officers teach. So it is, we have epidemiologists, we have post-traumatic stress trauma experts, we have firefighters who come in and teach. So it becomes an umbrella that creates the collaboration with intervention. And is it going to guarantee that one of these guys isn't going to get in trouble? No. What it does is it establishes the basics for a profession and some standards that all give us some security over this.
I know that you all have planes to catch. I'm going to finish up in just a moment, but let me take two more questions. Mayor Graves?
How do you all coordinate the presumably myriad community-based organizations that certainly would perceive themselves as having a role in this effort from, a health perspective, social perspective, youth development perspective? What are their roles and responsibilities? And to the extent that there are resources available for these organizations, how do you determine who gets the resources and who doesn't? Resources being a euphemism for money.
If I could just begin with an unusual answer, which is that LA actually has, in my view, a very promising tool called the Youth Services Eligibility Tool, and Guillermo and others can explain that in practice, but the principle behind it is what I mentioned earlier, which is the politics of this, once you get into implementation and you get into dollars, is so difficult. The only way to do that is to rely on the data and the evidence and on where there's actually need, because otherwise there's no reasonable way to make those decisions. So the only way you can make those tough decisions is by having an evidence-based process.
And what that means is that every youth that is referred for services is evaluated to make sure that that youth is at the highest risk of becoming fully identified as a gang member. So services are divided the same way that the funding is divided, meaning on data. You target the neediest neighborhoods, the neediest youth, the neediest families, and you document that through a process called the Youth Service Eligibility Tool that was developed specifically for the Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development in LA. Our research on that approach, we just got the draft report on year 2 evaluation, and we're going through the draft. The mayor will read it. After the mayor reads it, we will release that. But the results are very impressive to date. Currently, we have about 3,500 families receiving services for youth that have been identified at the highest risk. It doesn't mean the tool will not be effective to measure lower levels of delinquency, but given the way that we divide resources based on data, we need to identify who is most at risk, and that's one of the ways we do it.
And let me kind of, before, when I said we spread money like peanut butter, we did it over 15 districts, we would also do things like this. Kid, poor kid. We'd label, want to be part of the, I think it was the Bridges program, or LA Bridges, which was the predecessor effort. Poor kid, of color, at risk. That's not the way we do it anymore. I mean, father's in jail, brother's a gang member, we have a lot of different layers to it because we don't have all the resources that we need, and because we still don't understand that we've got to put a lot more resources in prevention and intervention. So as a result, we have to identify the highest need kids, and that's what we're doing. And I think that's a lot of this is data-driven. You heard Frank talk about measurable results. We're looking at measurable results. And as Connie said, we still have a long way to go. We're not anywhere where we need to be. But there's clearly this program, this 360-degree approach, is working more than it's not, and it's bearing fruit that we think can benefit and be replicated across the country. So I want to thank our panelists for being here. When you look outside and as you leave here, and we were here these last couple of nights, LA is, I won't say transformed, LA is improving. But when you look at downtown Hollywood, but it's not just those areas. It's virtually every area of the city is safer today, in no small part because we've grown our police department, because we're putting as much effort in the serving as the protecting, because we're focused on community-based policing, because we've got innovative anti-gang and anti-violence and youth development programs that are really helping us to reduce that violence. So thank you all. I really appreciate it. And